are Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Captain Logan.
I'm Vince.
Vince, today we're going to be talking about literature, and we're going to be asking the question, are you well-read? And what does it take to, in this day and age, consider yourself well-read? Has that changed? How has it changed? How do we feel about our just overall literary knowledge? That's the question today. So putting 10 minutes on the clock. All right, go ahead. Yeah.
I would like to say that I don't really particularly feel like I'm well-read. I feel like there's so much out there that I could never possibly be well-read. And I know as an English major, so I know I read a lot of things that otherwise I would not have read. And I know that your average Joe probably hasn't read the Canterbury Tales or Beowulf or you know, whatever.
Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of stuff out there that I have read, but I don't feel like I'm well read because I didn't particularly enjoy any of it. Like it's like, oh, here's information just shoved in my head, you know. It's kind of how a lot of people who are unclean treat the refrigerator. I'm gonna shove all this crap in there and just leave it, and then it molds, and then you have brain rot.
I think it's difficult to... I have no idea. I think it's kind of difficult to decide what that term means a lot of the time. You know what I mean? Like what? How do we figure out what is relevant? Aren't certain things going to be more relevant to people than other things? What is literary canon these days? Like how do you decide these are the works everybody ought to know? You know, this is what everybody ought to know. And then you even have some people who, like, it's less about being well read now, more about being cultured, right? Because literature isn't the driving force for pop culture like it once was. Now it's more like movies. So it's like, you know these days, like, if you haven't seen these movies, you're not cultured. You wouldn't call it well read, you just call it cultured, right? So it's like you need to see these movies and you read these books, and there's like you said, there's so much stuff. It's like is there a point at which it caps off where past a certain year nothing really matters anymore? You don't need to read that stuff. You know what I mean? Like it's not really important that you read anything modern, but you know, because and then also the way that we consider highbrow and lowbrow culture, or even if those things exist now, to some people, certainly in certain fields you'd think that, you know what I mean. But I mean, I think people these days wouldn't say, hey, Sherlock Holmes is lowbrow culture. It was when it was written. Yeah. You know, when it was written, that was more like mainstream pop culture, if there was such a thing.
Well, that's the thing, is it's not literary fiction. It's a mystery story.
Yeah,
it's genre fiction.
It is genre fiction.
So, you know, to some extent, I wonder if maybe what we're looking at is it depends on what community you're sitting in.
Partially so, yeah.
Like,
and what your interests are.
Like, oh, I'm really well read because I know Asimov and all those guys.
You're really well read in science fiction.
They say, but you know, you haven't read all the classics. What about Dickens? How can you say you're well read if all you've read is science fiction? We'll say, well, I'm well read in science fiction.
Well, and here's the thing, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, but what's interesting about science fiction is that a lot of science fiction makes a lot of literary references. Science fiction a lot of times is about like drawing conclusions from major works, and then extrapolating those things to like the future of mankind. So if you're not well read and you read science fiction, you won't always know what it's getting at. And this of course is not a book, but I mean, like Moby Dick is all over Wrath of Khan, as is as is Milton. Milton's a big deal in Wrath of Khan, and I really recommend, if you never watch anything else, I know I call it Star Trek a lot, but if you ever watch if you never watch anything else S.F. Debris does, watch his Wrath of Khan review, because he spells out those literary references in a really cool way. And a lot of stuff I never caught before, you know, because I have never read Milton, you know, my wife has. So then I was like, oh, that's why Sarah loves Wrath of Khan so much. She's read Milton. But anyway, so I'm just saying that like sometimes to understand certain literature, you gotta already be well read in other kinds of literature.
Yeah, you know, Star Trek making Moby Dick palatable because it's dull.
Yeah,
it
true.
is dull. There are big sections of Moby Dick. Now, this is why I could never consider myself well-read, because I just can't stomach it. There are big sections of Moby Dick that are just about whales. It's not about Moby Dick. It's not about the hunting of Moby Dick.
It's not even about the story that you're talking. It's just to hear some stuff about whales.
It's not even a sailor who takes a crazy weekend down there in, whatever town. It's here's some information about whales. It's not entirely unlike just suddenly there's this big philosophy section in the middle of a Steinbeck novel, and you're like, why? What happened to the characters? I liked those guys. This was interesting. And, part of the deal is that I just can't stomach it. Like, if you're going to have philosophy in a book, I want it to be in scene. I want it to be subtext. I want to know... I want to be able to learn about the world through the characters.
Yeah, you want to be fully engaged in the story and then gain what the story is about from itself, not from these side parts that spell things out for you, and then it gets back to the plot.
Yeah, I understand if...
but hey, I ain't saying all classic literature does that.
No, of course not. I understand if...
and some Dickens novels are better than other Dickens novels, okay? Like, I'm not saying... you were talking about Moby Dick, that's not Dickens, but I'm just saying that, like... for some authors, they've become so credible now, but it's not that... Or at least in my opinion, it's not like every single work a certain major author did is as good as another. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that there still is a certain amount of critical analysis that you ought to take with it, and the point of being well read is to be thinking. So just because it's old doesn't mean it's good. I mean, that's a point I want to throw out there.
I think we've touched on this subject a little bit in some of our other podcasts, as to just because it's canon doesn't mean you have to enjoy it. I mean, just because it's traditionally considered good doesn't mean that you have to like it. Just because it's considered bad doesn't mean that you can't enjoy it.
And I would make, and I hesitate to say this, I would almost make the case that just because it's considered canon doesn't mean that you have to watch it. Although I think that sometimes you should allow yourself to look at stuff you don't necessarily love. Like, I don't think if you go to classes that you should, hate classes because they make you look at stuff you don't necessarily love right away. Because the whole thing is not about having a good time as much as it is understanding the culture that you live in. You've got to understand the past in order to understand the present and where we're going. And so there's a certain amount of studying things that you're not necessarily hugely into that you're going to have to do to have... For me, it's less about being well-read, or at least it's less important for me that I'm well-read and more important to me that I'm well-rounded. And that includes being somewhat well-read. You know what I mean? I feel like I could never be completely well-read. I feel like there's an overwhelming amount of material that in my lifetime I could read 24 hours a day, and I would never feel like I had everything I wanted to have. Especially because eventually I would forget things from stuff I read before. I mean, I need to go back and reread Sun Tzu, because it's been a while.
Yeah. That's the thing, is that I think there's sort of this aristocrat, elitist nature to being well-read. And I think if you're interested in pop culture, you could never potentially feel like you're well-read. Because you look over at those comic books that you want to read, and then you look over at those classics that you feel like you should read, and then you look at those popular novels that you want to read, and then you look at books that are coming out today that people tell you that you should read. So what do you read to make yourself feel like you're well-read? Well, I think the answer is, if you're an elitist snob and you think that X, Y, and Z are no longer relevant, then you just go back to those classics and you can feel like you're well-read. I mean...
Yeah, I think that's great. I think if you're... I think there's kind of a line, okay? And you've got, on one side, you've got elitist snob, and on the other side you've got raging fanboy. And I wouldn't want to be either of those things. You know what I mean? Because the problem is, if you stray too far on the side, this is just my opinion. If you stray too far on the side, and this is not against anybody who's like, I love Batman, that's all I want to read. Okay, that's cool. I'm not saying that there's any problem with this is what I love, and I'm just not really interested in other things. I do think that you should get some historical context, but I'm just saying that, like, what I'm calling raging fanboyism is when you say, what I love to read is automatically culturally relevant and is like highbrow literature because I like it. Mm-hmm. That's not right. You know what I mean? On the other hand, you shouldn't go, well, because I've read all of these important works of literature, that makes all these other things on the other side like irrelevant. that's not good either. There's stuff to be taken from both, you know what I mean? But I don't think that everything you read for fun is going to be like important literature that talks about the world and gives you a, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I think that's worth venturing into, other avenues and saying what you like. I mean, I took one British literature course and hated everything in that class. Everything. If I
was I in that course with you, or was it American Lit we took together?
Yeah, we took American Lit together, and I hated some of the things, but I liked some of it.
I like some of it, yeah.
I mean, I wish I could remember the big poet who I just hate, Byron, Lord Byron.
Oh yeah,
I hate Lord Byron. But then I take another British literature class, and I find things that I enjoy. I mean, Marlowe is fun, and Shakespeare is fun. I mean,
yeah, sure.
You'd be surprised how interesting Shakespeare is, despite how much stigma is attached to him as being the ultimate highbrow guy.
I didn't realize how much you enjoyed Shakespeare.
I took a class, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, or maybe I'm a little ashamed to admit it, but I'm going to admit it to you guys, that how I got through my Shakespeare class was I would get the BBC production.
I did the same thing.
And, stick that guy in your player, and then you take that book and you follow along, and you're reading poetry, and you're getting the theatrical experience at the same time. Because for me, reading Shakespeare just doesn't cut it. I need that vocal inflection to help me know what it means. And
I felt the same way, although, I think that I'm somewhat of... I'm like 50-50. I'm kind of an auditory learner, and I'm also a written learner. So like getting both at the same time. I'm not sure with me. It's just Shakespeare. I think that it helps with for me with any like script or play. You know what I mean? To read it aloud. If I wasn't watching those, I was at least reading it aloud myself. I certainly wasn't just reading it in my head because it didn't work.
Although I got to tell you, Dr. Faustus, I read and really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I remember you loved that.
I was like, why is this so cool? I don't know. Maybe Satan walking around like a slick, friendly guy for a while is really interesting to me.
I'm wondering if maybe this should have been a podcast. I think there's a lot of other places we could have taken this.
Maybe we'll expand the topic into a podcast.
Come back to it. Do you have any final thoughts, real quick?
I don't think you can thoroughly be well-read. I don't think that there's a way to, without being elitist in some way. Whether you're saying, without being elitist toward the thing that you love, I don't think there's a way that you can, just soundly feel like you're well-read.
I think that, I think you can, but in niches. Because if you go to college and you look at professors, it's not like every professor knows everything on every topic. It's that, and when we say well-read, of course, I think we're talking fiction. I mean, we could, you could branch this out into nonfiction, and then it's crazy, But when you're talking about just like works of fictional literature, you've got lots of different professors of the arts that are experts on certain areas, and that's what they focus on. Why? Because every area's got a lot of stuff, and it's huge. You know what I mean? So you have people who are experts in science fiction. You have people who are experts in classical English literature different sections. You had a professor that just taught Australian literature. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was a whole niche. So where I'm going to come down on this is if you want to be able to have a really well thought out, interesting, intellectual discussion about a certain kind of literature, you ought to read it.
Yeah.
First. That's like sometimes I feel like folks will have read one or two things on something, and then they'll think they're an expert, and then they'll try to branch out and talk to people as if. And I'm not saying that you can't have conversations about whatever you want to, but you need to be honest with yourself and with other people about what you really know about it.
I think
that's important.
I think we have our topic for the podcast that extends this. I think it does being well read matter.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, there we go. We have a podcast.
All right, cool. Well, hey, what do you think? Do you think that you are well read, either generally or on a particular topic, and also maybe what kinds of literature, especially classical literature? I'd love to see what people are reading, what people really enjoy. This is not a topic that we've broached a whole lot, and again, maybe when we expand this to a podcast, we'll talk more about specific works that we've read, because we didn't really get into that. We talked more about it more broadly. So anyway, leave us comments, and also if there's anything you'd like us to talk about in a future video, of course, leave that in the comments as well. And thanks as always for watching. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince, reminding you to support your local comic book store.
We'll see you next time.